What if I told you that one single day changed the course of human history forever? Not because of a war, not because of an empire rising or falling, but because of a man who walked willingly into his own suffering, fully aware that within hours he would be betrayed, abandoned, judged, humiliated, and executed. And even knowing all of that, he didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't resist, he accepted it, and in doing so, he created a moment so powerful that it would divide history itself into before and after, a moment that people would talk about for thousands of years, a moment that would shape beliefs, cultures, and entire civilizations, because that day marked the beginning of everything we now call after Christ. To understand how everything unfolded, we need to go back to ancient Jerusalem, a city unlike any other at the time, a place that stood at the center of religion, politics, and identity for the Jewish people, but also a city living under the shadow of one of the most powerful empires in history, the Roman Empire, a force that controlled vast territories and maintained order through strength, discipline, and fear. And although the Romans allowed the Jewish people to maintain their traditions, their rituals, and their faith, this freedom came with a condition. Nothing could challenge Roman authority. Nothing could disrupt their control. And that fragile balance created a tension that was constantly present in the city. Because among the people, there was a growing expectation that a Messiah would come, a chosen one who would transform their reality. But no one agreed on what that meant. Some imagined a warrior, a leader who would rise against Rome and bring freedom through force, while others began to believe in something very different, something quieter but far more radical. The idea that change would not come from the outside but from within. And at the center of that idea was Jesus Christ, a man who had gained attention not through power but through presence. Through the way he spoke, the way he acted, and the way he connected with people. He spoke in simple language but with deep meaning. He healed the sick, he challenged those in power, and he gathered followers wherever he went. And by the time he returned to Jerusalem during the Passover, one of the most important celebrations of the year, he was already a known figure, surrounded by curiosity, faith, doubt, and suspicion. Crowds followed him. Some believed he was the Messiah. Others saw him as a prophet. But there were also those who saw him as a threat, especially among the religious leaders who feared losing their authority and influence, because his message challenged the structure they had built. And so, while some welcomed him with hope, others watched him carefully, waiting for the right moment to act. As evening approached on what would become his final day in freedom, Jesus gathered with his 12 disciples in a private upper room, away from the noise of the city, a moment that would later be immortalized in the painting The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. But what happened there was far more than a simple meal. It was a moment filled with symbolism, tension, and meaning. They followed the traditional Passover rituals, sharing bread and wine, remembering their history. But then Jesus did something unexpected, something that broke all expectations of leadership. He stood up, took a cloth, and began to wash the feet of his disciples, a task reserved for servants, for those at the lowest level of society. And in doing this, he redefined what power meant, showing that true leadership was not about control, but about service, not about being above others, but about lowering yourself to lift others up. And as they returned to the table, the atmosphere began to shift. Jesus took the bread, broke it, and said that it represented his body. Then he took the wine and said it represented his blood, introducing a new meaning that went far beyond tradition, something that his followers would only fully understand later. But even as these powerful moments unfolded, there was a growing sense of unease in the room. Something felt different, something felt heavy. And then Jesus spoke words that changed everything. He told them that one of them would betray him, and suddenly confusion filled the room, each disciple questioning themselves, asking if they were the one unable to understand how betrayal could come from within their own group. But Jesus already knew, because among them was Judas Iscariot, and even though the act had not yet been carried out, the decision had already been made. According to historical accounts, Judas had agreed to hand Jesus over in exchange for 30 pieces of silver, a value that at the time represented the price of a slave. And even knowing this, Jesus did not expose him. He did not remove him or shame him. Instead, he allowed him to remain, to share in that final moment. And at one point, he handed Judas a piece of bread and quietly told him to do what he had already decided to do. And with that, Judas stood up and left, stepping into the darkness of the night, carrying with him the weight of what was about to happen. Not long after Jesus and the remaining disciples left the city and went to a place called Gethsemane, a quiet garden filled with olive trees where he often went to pray. But this night was different. The emotional weight was overwhelming. The awareness of what was coming pressed down on him with an intensity that is difficult to imagine. And according to descriptions, his stress was so extreme that he began to sweat blood, a rare condition caused by intense psychological pressure. And in that moment, we see a deeply human side of him, not distant, not unaffected, but fully aware of the pain that awaited him. And in his prayer, he expressed this struggle, asking if it was possible for that suffering to be taken away, but ultimately accepting that what was about to happen was part of something greater, showing a level of commitment that went beyond fear. While nearby, his disciples, exhausted and unable to fully grasp the situation, fell asleep despite being asked to stay awake. And it was in this moment of vulnerability that everything began to unfold, because Judas returned, this time accompanied by guards sent by the religious authorities. And to identify Jesus among the group, he used a gesture that would become one of the most recognized symbols of betrayal in history: a kiss. Something that normally represented respect and loyalty, now transformed into a signal that would lead to his arrest. The guards moved in and took him. The disciples reacted with panic, one of them even attempting to fight back and injuring a guard. But Jesus immediately stopped any resistance, making it clear that he would not escape or fight. He surrendered willingly, and from that moment on, events moved quickly. He was taken during the night, interrogated in rushed and irregular trials. Accusations were made, but evidence was weak. Yet the decision seemed already made. He had to be condemned. But the religious authorities did not have the power to execute him, so they brought him before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, turning a religious accusation into a political one. Because claiming to be a king could be seen as a threat to Roman authority, Pilate questioned him carefully, observing his behavior, and found no clear reason to condemn him. He saw no signs of rebellion, no danger, only a man who remained calm under pressure. But outside, the situation was escalating. The crowd was growing, voices were rising, and pressure from the religious leaders intensified. So Pilate attempted to avoid responsibility by offering the crowd a choice, following a tradition of releasing one prisoner during Passover, presenting them with Jesus or a known criminal. And in a moment that would echo through history, the crowd chose the criminal, influenced by those who had already decided the outcome. And as the demand for execution grew louder, Pilate made a symbolic gesture, washing his hands in front of the people, declaring himself not responsible. And with that, the decision was sealed: Jesus would be crucified, one of the most brutal forms of execution used by the Romans, not only to kill but to humiliate and serve as a warning. He was forced to carry his own cross through the streets, weakened, injured, and surrounded by people who watched with different reactions, some curious, some indifferent, some grieving. The path he walked would later be known as the Way of Suffering, leading to a place called Golgotha, where the execution would take place. There he was nailed to the cross, his hands and feet fixed in place, his body suspended in a position that made breathing painful and exhausting, every movement causing more pain. And for hours he remained there, enduring not only physical agony, but also humiliation, as people mocked him and soldiers cast lots for his clothing, and even in that moment he spoke words of forgiveness, asking that those responsible be forgiven, because they did not fully understand what they were doing. Beside him were two criminals, one who mocked him, and another who recognized his own guilt and asked to be remembered. And in response, Jesus offered him reassurance that he would not be forgotten, demonstrating compassion even in his final moments. As time passed, the suffering intensified, and according to the accounts, darkness fell over the land, adding to the sense that something extraordinary was happening. And then after hours of pain, he spoke his final words, declaring that it was finished, and with that he died. But even in that moment, the story was not over, because what followed would transform everything. What seemed like defeat would become the foundation of a message that would spread across regions, cultures, and centuries, turning followers into witnesses and fear into faith. And today, more than 2,000 years later, this story is still being told, still being studied, and still being questioned, not just because of what happened, but because of what it meant. Because that single day did not just end a life, it changed the world forever.